Highr Summer of Learning next webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about secrets of classroom management, and I welcome all of you to Highr. To those of you who've been here before, welcome back. To those of you who are new, Highr is a teacher professional development and evaluation company, and over the last 2 weeks now, we've been organizing our Summer of Learning event, which is helping teachers upskill and prepare for classrooms of the future, get ready with all of the upcoming and already happening pedagogical changes in your classroom practices. And we bring you panelists and experts every week who share their resources and strategies and tips and best practices so that you can all be better prepared for what's going to come in the couple of weeks to come when we go back to school, or even as we continue teaching and learning online. So without further ado, I'll just quickly start sharing my screen and begin today's proceedings with a couple of housekeeping announcements so that we all know what to expect. During this webinar, the panelists can't see you, and we also will not be using the raise your hand feature for this particular session. We'd request you all to use the Q&A option, which is right at the bottom of your screens. The Q&A is where you should park all of your questions as the session goes along. We'll keep coming to questions in between the panelist presentations, and we'll also try and keep addressing these as the session goes along. It'll be really useful if you would keep questions in the Q&A and all other general observations and sharings and things that you'd like to comment on in the chat. It just helps us get to your questions faster. We do encourage a lot of healthy debate, a lot of interaction, a lot of observations, but we do request you to treat the chat box as well as the Q&A box as sacred spaces. Please be as kind and as courteous as you would expect others to be to you. Not enough kindness going around in the world. This would be a good place to start. Webinar recordings and PPTs, this is something that all of you ask us. All recordings and PPTs will be shared with all of you via email. You'll all get copies of this webinar's proceedings. For those of you who would like to ask your friends to join in, and if you're unable to join in via, or if they are unable to join in via Zoom, you can always invite them to our Facebook group to watch the live stream of this webinar as well. Lastly, we don't offer certificates for our webinars. Our webinars are free open learning events. We invite everybody from all over the world to come in and share and learn together, but we don't certify for attendance. So I hope that that answers the question that comes up very, very frequently. Moving on to talk to you, to introduce you to today's proceedings and what we're going to be talking about today, and how that fits in with what Highr does with regards to quality teaching. And to those of you who are familiar with us, our biggest dream, our goal, our motto is to ensure that quality teaching should reach every classroom. And to do that, we've identified 4 broad pillars, which we feel are, and as backed by research, are quintessential to quality teaching. The first of these being planning for classroom delivery, the second being designing instruction, the third being managing student progress, and the fourth being practicing professionalism. And of course, all 4 of these different domains feed into one another. And every week, as we've gone along with Highr Summer of Learning, we focused on one of these pillars. And this week, we're going to be focusing on managing student progress, which is where we're going to be talking to all of you about, for today's session, about what are some of the secrets involved with classroom management? What do you do with disruptive behavior? Can it be prevented before it even happens? And are we looking at classroom management in the way that we really ought to be looking at classroom management? Or are there other ways in which we can approach our strategies towards managing our students, for the lack of a better word? And a lot of different strands of thoughts obviously popping up in all of your heads, I'm sure, already. And some of these we will be discussing in today's session with our panelists, who I will now very quickly introduce you to. The first one, welcoming Kamna Jain. Kamna is a special educator. She is currently the special needs coordinator at the Shriram School, Aravali, and has many years of experience working with students with special needs. And in today's webinar is going to be talking to all of you about how you can, as educators, adapt and cater to the needs of special learning, to the needs of students who have special learning requirements within an online scenario, as well as when you go back to classrooms in brick and mortar. The second panelist is Tonya Gilchrist. Tonya is a senior literacy strategist, and she works on literacy, is a specialist, and is a senior consultant with Errant Kent Consulting. And Tonya has been working all over the world to amplify inquiry and honoring agency in students, and to help bring out student voice as well as student choice within classroom environments. And it's going to be talking to us a little bit today about how student voice and choice is so crucial to classroom management. The last of our panelists is Dr. Matthew Joseph. Matt is the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessments at Leicester Public Schools in Massachusetts. Matt is also an ED in Education Leadership from Boston College. And in his experience as a school leader, Matt is going to be sharing with us some of his secrets when it comes to classroom management and how we can go about solidifying our own strategies and our own practices when it comes to managing our classrooms. So that's our panel for today, ladies and gentlemen. And without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker for the afternoon today to get us started with this discussion around classroom management. So Tonya, over to you, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Great, yes. Great to see everyone virtually here. Thanks for being here. And to get us started today, I really wanted to kind of start with our mindset and our stance when we think about this topic. So I know we're all here to talk about classroom management, but I would challenge or encourage us to flip that a little bit and think maybe we stop calling it classroom management. Words are powerful, language matters. And so we could think about it as classroom empowerment, because many of the things that we want in our classrooms, when we think of classroom management, we want kids to be engaged. We want kids to be focused, to create and do. We want kids to be able to communicate with each other in principled ways. All of those things are really wrapped up in empowerment. So I'd like us to just start with thinking through that overall lens. Some of you might be familiar with Daniel Pink's book called Drive from a few years ago. A beautiful quote in there is, "Control leads to compliance. Autonomy leads to engagement." And I've found that for sure to be true in my own experience as a person. I've seen it with kids as well. And I would even add a layer to this, that it's not even always just control leads to compliance. I think too, control can lead to rebellion. If you're trying to control someone else, either they're going to comply or they might rebel. And so some of the quote unquote issues that we might see in our classroom are likely stemming from the fact that kids don't have autonomy. Autonomy is really powerful. In fact, really over 50 years they've been studying. It was Edward Dietschy and his colleagues at the University of Rochester. Over 50 years they studied everything they could when it comes to attention. And they found that the #1 predictor for sustained attention is autonomy. So really what we're after with kids, what's going to predict that is, are they self-motivated? Do they have what we often call choice, voice, and ownership? In the PYP, I know many of us might be at IB schools. This is how the IB defines agency. And I really like it. I think it's a nice, concise way to think, yes, this is what we want for kids. So if we're finding in our classrooms that things aren't going smoothly, that things don't seem to be working, it usually comes back to this voice, choice, and ownership. Do kids have that? We can be asking ourselves in our minds, where are kids getting choice in my classroom environment? Where are they able to be actively responsible for their own learning? It makes a big difference. And I can think too, in our own lives, it's often helpful just to remember kids are people too. So in your own life, think about the times when you've set your own goal and the difference that made. For me, recently, last year, I decided I had this goal where I wanted to learn how to do a handstand. And this was big for me. I am not a very athletic person, but I just thought a handstand seemed really neat and I wanted to do it. And I had friends who were able to do it. So I started doing what all inquirers do. I started studying it. I watched YouTube videos, I read articles, and then I started practicing. And no one was making me do this. Yet every day I was practicing to do it because I chose the goal, I was inspired, I had a passion and an interest. So while of course there are things that we know we want kids to inquire into in their 3rd grade year, in their 7th grade year, for various reasons, we can still always be thinking, where inside this inquiry, where inside this topic and this concept, is there room for voice, choice, and ownership? Also, another thing to think about, it's not even just I get to choose my own challenge. That's really important, but it's also the positive emotions that come with that. Our brains actually crave positive emotions. So if we have a positive experience, we want more of it. And boredom, stress, feeling controlled, that doesn't lead to a positive emotion. That's going to lead to strife and conflict. So keeping in mind voice, choice, and ownership, then we're going to dig into now for a couple minutes a few things that right away we could start to do to help lift this up, to help our kids really harness their autonomy. One thing is to think about your environment. What makes for an agentic environment? And education will often say that environment is the 3rd teacher, right? The adult is a teacher, the child themselves is a teacher, but the environment is a teacher too. So we don't want to underestimate that. And these 3 things on the slide here are really important. One thing is to think, is your environment actually accessible for kids? If we want them to make choices, they need to be able to access things to choose from. So if I think back to when I was in school, I know for sure I had teachers where everything was locked up in like the teacher closet or the teacher area, and I wasn't allowed to touch any of it. Hopefully, we're in a place now where our classrooms aren't like that. We have materials available to kids. If it's writing, for example, they know where to go to get different types of paper, different pencils and markers. It's organized. They know what to do if their pencil breaks. We've set up rituals and routines, which we're going to talk about again in a moment. And it's authentic to what we actually do as readers, as writers, as artists. Whatever is happening in our environment, is it really set up the way that we learn best? Is there choice, voice, and ownership in that? So in many classrooms, we'll have flexible seating so that kids can choose, like, well, I focus more if I'm at a standing desk right now, or if I'm sitting on a floor pillow, or if I'm sitting at kind of a regular desk and chair. I have a few options and I can make those choices. Too often we can find ourselves saying, I wish kids were more responsible. I wish they would take responsibility, but you can't take responsibility if it's not there for the taking. So we want to set up our environment as a 3rd teacher to be like, here are some choices. How will you make a responsible choice between these things, right? So one thing to think about would be the rituals and routines that you set up for your environment. That's part of that organization and authenticity, is it's not your classroom, it's our classroom. So at the beginning of the year, it's really important to take the time, maybe 1 to 2 weeks, where your mini lessons are just about, what do we do in this classroom? How do we thrive together as readers, writers, thinkers, scientists? And you'll set up some rituals and routines. So for example, if the issue is in many classrooms, it can be what seems like simple things, but they make a big difference, like sharpening your pencil, for example. Well, instead of just being like, oh, that's just going to be annoying again this year, or kids are going to have trouble with that again this year, instead we can set a routine with kids that they know from the get-go of what happens. So an example with that might be that you have 2 jars, and one is filled with sharpened pencils and one is to put the unsharpened pencils in. And at recess or at the end of the day, you, or maybe it's a student's like job of the week, sharpens those pencils that were unsharpened and moves them to the sharpened jar. And so kids know during that work period, that's just what they do. They don't have to come to you when you're trying to confer with a child or work with a small group. They're not interrupting you. They can be agentic. They know exactly where to go and what to do. Or when they need to go to the bathroom, what's the routine? What do they do? So really setting clear expectations and rituals and routines is very important, because then you can use language to help kids harness their agency, to show them like, I know you got this. I know you can be independent. So if you've set up those rituals and routines and a child does come up to you and is tapping on the shoulder when you're trying to work with another kid and they're saying, I have to go to the bathroom, instead you can be like, oh, remember what you can do? Or if you made the routine together, remember what we decided? And they might say, oh yeah, sign the sheet by the door and go, yeah, that's right. You don't have to ask or tell me. Remember, I trust you to do the principled thing. And that I trust you is really important. We have to remember that everything we do as teachers, it's all about relationships. So building that trust at the very beginning and showing kids like, you're a part of this space. You have voice, choice, and ownership here, and I trust you, and I believe in you, really matters. This goes back to research that really started back in the 70s with Judith Kleinfeld, and she coined this term you may have heard before. It's called being a warm demander. This is a stance we want to take in our class to have empowerment, and for some of us, what we might still think of as management. That gel, that flow that we want in our class can start with us being what's called a warm demander. And this idea is that you're high on personal warmth and high on active demandingness. It's not one or the other. Too often what we see is that it is one or the other in most classrooms. And that's where we can run into some trouble. We're either thinking, well, it's all about relationships, so I'm gonna be high on warmth, but not really expect enough from my kids, or not kind of demand in a warm way that I know they can do this and I have high expectations for them. Or we skew to the other side of things and we're all about demandingness, but no warmth. And what we're finding, as with many things, is balance matters. You need both. So in a warm demander classroom, we're going to use a lot of positive presuppositions with kids. We're going to assume that they're doing wonderful things because we know, we truly authentically believe they have the capacity to do just that. So some questions that you might use as a warm demander and also to amplify inquiry and agency are like some of these you see on the screen. This could be happening when you're in a one-on-one conference with kids. This could be a question you give them to reflect on in journal writing or to talk out with a partner. There are many ways we could use this language, but you'll notice we're not asking them like, do you wonder anything? Or do you have a plan? Instead of that, we're actually saying, what's your plan? Like I'm giving the positive presupposition that I assume you have one because you're the kind of person that's self-motivated and makes a plan, right? How did this change the way you think? Because I'm assuming that you're the kind of person who has a growth mindset and has an open mind. So through this language, we're showing kids we believe in them, we believe they're this kind of person, and that they're going to do amazing things. And in order to do this, as a warm demander, it's important we don't forget then, once again, I just want to reinforce that idea of relationships and trust. Too often we try to be just the demander without the trust. And we have to remember kids are people too. Why should they trust us? You know, why should they listen to us? If you set up that trust first through listening to kids, talking to kids, letting them know that you care, then when you want to demand something, when you're like, hey, I know you can do more than this, like I believe in you, they know you mean it. And then they want to go further because you've built that trust, that relational trust is there. So that's really, really important. A few resources that I want to lift up for you. If you want to learn more about this, these are 3 great recent texts that I highly recommend. The first one, What's the Best That Could Happen, would be super helpful if you want to read more about how to create an agentic environment, how to lift up agency for kids. The book in the middle is super helpful if you want to learn more about being a warm demander and being culturally responsive with kids. Because being a warm demander is one part helping us with what we're talking about today with quote unquote classroom management, but it's also so much more. It's actually about helping kids achieve more, because when you're a warm demander, you help them get into that zone of proximal development. You help them access more cognitively and academically. And then, as the third title says, as you can kind of guess, start with joy. How do we lift up happiness and joy? Because that's what's motivating. And that's what we want at the end of the day. We want kids who are self-motivated to go off and do amazing things. So I hope that gets some ideas sparked and going. And if you want to dig into more, those are 3 great books to get you started.
And that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tanya. Such amazing, powerful ideas coming out of there. The whole idea behind promoting student agency, how we can be warm demanders. I think that's going to be my catchphrase for the month. It's such a beautiful idea right there in terms of how is it that we can actually encourage agency, because agency is not something that's given. It exists, and we just have to acknowledge it, we have to encourage it, and we have to make sure that kids own it, and they're able to do all kinds of interesting and amazing things with that agency. Which actually brings me to my first question, which is coming in from Sangeeta, and I'll open this out to all 3 of you. Sangeeta's asking, how can we ensure that empowerment is actually used constructively? And I thought that that's a very, very interesting question. So if any of you would like to take that on.
Well, I can jump in here, and I don't want to
Sure.
skirt the question at all, but I'm going to try to address that. I saw that in the thread in the session, the part that I talk about expectations and setting that if you know where you're going, you can see the positive, as Tanya was talking about, in the expectations you have of your students, and you can reinforce that because they are actually reaching the expectation versus just complying to a task.
Absolutely. And thanks for that, Matt. And I think to add to that, there was another question which talked about how we can make online learning environments more agentic, and how do we sort of encourage this the agency that we want to bring about within online situations and when we're learning online. Tonya, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so a few thoughts. One thing would be, I think all of us have probably learned through this lived experience of the pandemic that online learning and in-person learning just aren't the same. It's not apples to apples, so to speak. So a few things would be just considering that the way we use time is going to be different. So in most cases, we're going to be doing certain things all together in a Zoom room as a class because that community feel is important, but we're certainly not going to be in a Zoom room or a Google Meet for 7 hours a day together the way we would be in person at school. So some different things you could do to really lift up agency would be to perhaps set up some what we might think of as like office hours where kids are getting to choose to come and meet with you. You might even list a list of things you've been kind of on about as a community of readers or writers, like, oh, we've all been learning about how we think deeply about characters. Here's 3 big things that you could meet with me about tomorrow to think even more deeply about this topic. Almost like setting up small group topics, but they're getting to choose which one to go to. And that way you're able to personalize for them. You're meeting with a smaller group of kids. They're getting some choice and ownership. To add more voice, you could also, once they're used to that, have them come up with some topics as well that you add into the things you're going to be talking about. So I think one thing that opens up more space is just recognizing we're not always, as a whole class, all going to be live in the same Zoom room. It's kind of getting more creative with that. Some teachers will also record a few different like mini lessons or talks and kind of put a menu on the class website or something, and kids, or a menu on a Padlet, and kids get to choose from that. So also, depending on your context, if you can't, if kids can't often meet live because of support at home and different things, there are ways that they can get that information asynchronously as well. So those were a few ideas. And of course, I'm sure that Matt and Kemna might have some things to add as well, perhaps.
Absolutely. Just very quickly before we move on to our next panelist, there's one other very interesting question that I thought we'd take on, which is to do with teenagers, really, and the idea of helping teenagers take on more responsibilities, and making them more aware of things that they need to take ownership of. And this is something that we do struggle with, because teenagers are they're a planet unto themselves in very many ways. So if any of you would like to talk a little bit about how we specifically can talk about building in a sense of responsibility and ownership when it comes to middle school, moving into high school kind of students.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I'll jump in. One thing that immediately I was thinking with that great question is the power of listening. I think for all humans, but especially adolescents, like, they need to know that you see them and you hear them, and that you're open-minded. We're often talking, especially in IB schools, one of our profile attributes is open-mindedness, that you're open-minded too. So usually when I'm working with schools, we're big advocates of the workshop framework, and that's because it opens up space and time for you to talk with kids and confer with kids. And I think right now, being online, that opens up even more opportunities where you could confer one-on-one with kids at different times virtually. And in that time to really listen to their thoughts. If there's something that you're struggling with, to be honest and open and say, hey, I noticed that, you seem really frustrated with this. Like, talk to me about that. What's going on? Because then when you know their perspective, then you can lean into that and think about, maybe, and I'm learning stuff all the time too. So I'll probably learn something along the way of like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. What's a plan? What could we decide together then that feels fair, that feels okay, and make a plan together. And it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't mean that there's no longer going to be any problems. Of course not. We're all human and we're going to have conflict at times. But if they know that you really care and you're listening, then they respect you. Respect does have to be earned. So we can't just expect kids to respect us because we're old. That doesn't make sense, right? So we need to show them, like, hey, like, you respect me because I respect you and I value you as a person. Yeah,
that's such a beautiful thought, and I know that, Matt, you've got a couple of interesting things to say when it comes to working these things out together with kids. So I'm just going to quickly pass the baton over to you to ask you to take us forward with what your thoughts.
Awesome. I got a little nervous there because Tanya said just because we're old, and then you go into, well, Matt, you're going to have a lot to share about, and I'm like, please don't say being old. Like, I was a little nervous there where you were going to take us on that that pass off there, but I definitely want to talk some things. However, listening to Tanya, I would almost give up my 10 minutes to continue to hear you. Thank you for all of that learning. And if at any point in the next 31 minutes you want to bust out a handstand, we'll just step back and see you go for it.
I think we should end with that, Tanya. Your handstand.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. And yes, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to share my screen as well and go through a few things. I'm going to keep the question answers and try to jump back and forth. There's a lot going on, which is really exciting. And as we said off the top, I'm Matthew Joseph. I'm from Massachusetts. The closest probably landmark for those of you who haven't come to the States is Boston. I'm about 40 minutes west of Boston without traffic. I'm about 2.5 hours with traffic, depending on where you're going. The next town over is Foxborough, for any of you who follow American football. The Patriots play in Foxborough, Massachusetts. So let me throw this on presentation mode, and we're going to get rocking here. So I'm going to take kind of what Tanya was talking about and dive into 3 other areas talking about expectations, communication, and consistency of all of this. And as you can already see, the dude from the States doesn't have the background. I didn't use the same background. I'm already doing things differently. So you're gonna have to stick with me for this because the backgrounds are wonderful. And but I like to just point out a few things here. So doing things different from the jump. The other thing I hope that we can do today, all the things that I'm talking about are coming from the 2 books that I wrote, but I'd love to ship some over to India. I saw a lot of places that, so tweet out, I'm gonna send out a few for those of you who tweet out. I'm gonna pick 2 or 3 winners and send a few over to you. But I've learned so much both from listening to Tanya and jumping back and forth from social media. So utilize those platforms when we can, because we're coming, even the speakers here are from 3 different areas, from Europe, America, and India. So we're staying connected, 1,000 people participating and more on Facebook Live. Real quick, I wanted to give you my lens because I'm going to come at my talk from a school or building leadership model. I was a classroom teacher, a 3rd and 5th grade teacher, and then had an opportunity to be a school principal for 11 years, and then the past 4 years, a district leader. So some of the things that I'm talking about are going to both touch on the classroom, also talk to all of our school leaders out there and any of our district leaders. I also want to share some ideas with you, because as we talk, as Tanya said, it's not about managing anything. It's about setting the expectations and setting a culture that's intrinsic motivation. You talked about Daniel Pink's book. His book talks, one of his book talks a lot, Drive, talks a lot about intrinsic motivation. And that's where I'm going to start talking about today, because when students come to you, and I saw a lot about online learning as well, they learn for somebody, not just from somebody. And as we create these positive cultures, as Tanya said, it starts with relationships. And for me, that's a big piece of what I'm going to share, is how are you creating intrinsic motivation in your students so you're not managing them? They are essentially, I was going to use a different word, but agency is way better than the word I was going to use, that you're creating an agency of self-advocation for them, that they're doing that. And I think this comes from the difference in setting expectations versus creating rules. And what I mean by that is rules typically, if you have a classroom and you have on your wall, are things kids, students, adults shouldn't do. And it's usually not part of something that they have created. They've walked into this, boom, it's your classroom, your rules. And when Tanya was talking about the positive feel of that, that seems like they're coming to you versus it's the collective group of learning. Oh, I forgot to start my timer. I don't want to go over. And doing that, it's just simply things that students shouldn't be doing. And that's not the mindset. Tanya went into a lot of that, of how students are coming into class and how it should look. But when I think of rules, that's the first thing I think of. And typically, when you have this, there's rules, there's posters, there's different things in your classroom. And for me, I always give the recommendation when I'm a principal now, start with nothing up, because then you create things together. It becomes a culture of building together. It becomes our classroom. Do these things together. And doing that will not only change from management to motivation, it will change that they have that ownership of the classroom and agency. When you create expectations, you are focusing on the positive attributes you want students to attain, or if you're a building leader, that you want your staff to attain. And it creates a collaborative feel, and it adds that ownership. When Tanya was talking about agency, it starts with having that ownership. You feel a part of something. And when you feel a part of something, you are now accountable for that. And that leads to this moving away from management and moving away from a culture of inclusiveness. And you also have to remember, and we have participants on here who teach pre-kindergarten through 3rd graders up to, I saw teenagers and even higher ed. So make sure your expectations are age appropriate. Make sure it's communicating what you want to get out and what are essential, because you go and have 40 expectations and then it just becomes a laundry list. You want to stress the high leverage parts of your classroom, your school, your district, your campus, that will reach that intrinsic motivation, that are important, that speak to what you stand for. So again, I don't want to just spew out, this is what you should do. Here's some examples. I'm not saying take these, although these are ones that I typically start with to recommend. Instead of saying don't be late, like, okay, now it's a negative. Talk about be prompt, be active, be ready when you come to class, be prepared, be polite. You know, you can read through these and they're going to be posted. Be a problem solver. These are things you can really look through and think of all the don'ts that could go along with this. Don't leave your book at home. Don't be mean to your classmates, whatever it is. But if you put the onus on the positive aspect of it, students want to reach it. Just like I said in the opening, they want to learn for someone. They also are pleasers as well, and they want to perform for you. So setting those expectations, it may look like this, it may look like something you create with your class, because every culture is different, every classroom is different, and every location is different. But what shouldn't be different is that setting negative rules of what not to do is going to lead to negative outcomes over time. I did this as an adult. When I was at Boston College and I worked with a group of school and district leaders, we set expectations for ourselves. This is literally our document that we all signed before we started our research. This is what we committed to. These were our expectations of each other. And through that, it became a very positive, active environment. Also, this is definitely a leadership lens. Educators, you also have expectations that you should share to your students, because when they feel you're there for them, and when they see you're giving yourself to them, it becomes that agency, it becomes that positive culture that Tanya was talking about, that you are doing some of these things for them. You're assuring them that if they're following expectations, so are you. It's not do as I say, not as I do. It's we are doing this together. And through that, you will give those students or your staff, if you're the leaders, that sense of we're in this together. Because when those expectations are set, students know what to expect every single day when they walk into class. And it allows students to monitor themselves. It gives them the opportunity to work with each other and spend more time on task versus not following the rules. And Tanya spoke a lot about that positive reinforcement. When you see students reaching those expectations, you are now giving that positive praise on something that you hope all of our students are reaching and meeting those expectations. So having that out there allows you to do that. So you have expectations, that's fabulous. But if it's not consistent throughout your classroom, and it's not consistent throughout your school or your district, then that's great that you have them, but how are you following through on them? So besides having the expectations, you need to be consistent with them, because when you have that, it allows for maximum benefit in your class. We all have academic standards. I know in Massachusetts, we have specific standards we need to hit when students are complete third grade, when students graduate. We have this already in place. Why shouldn't we do the same with our behavioral expectations? That if it's consistent, you're going to reach the maximum benefit for your school or your classroom to reach. So being consistent is critical, because when students or staff walk in every day, they know what to expect. They feel confident, they can be more engaged because they know what they're walking into. Stress, for the most part, is the fear of the unknown. And if students are wondering what's happening from class to class, it's a little bit trickier, especially in the beginning. And especially I saw a lot about virtual classes and starting up and different things. If you have the same expectations, you're going to know if you're on a Zoom call with Tanya, if you're on a Zoom call with me, Zoom call with Kamya, these are our expectations. Also makes it easier to recognize when things are being accomplished, because you can give that positive praise and link it to something that we want to continue and duplicate over time. And the other thing we see a lot, and I was in principal in elementary school, I saw a lot of the divide and conquer. Oh, I'm going to go to Mr. Joseph because he'll let me do this. Oh, but if I go to Miss Bemis, she might not let me do this, or vice versa, probably. And looking at what happens from class to class is not healthy for your culture in the student management, we'll say, because that was part of what we were talking about, but student behavioral outcomes that you're looking for. So having that consistency creates one message in one voice. And speaking of voice, so you have your expectations, you have them consistent. But if people don't know about them, then it's just insular within your classroom. So I won't read through all of these. I put this on here for the recording so that you can have it. Post the expectations on your website, post it on social media once, twice a week, have handouts, something that goes home. Post expectations in the classroom, around the school. One that I wanted to share is post expectations to celebrate where you think something might not be going on. If you want to make sure that the cafeteria is having positive social interactions, put that expectation up in the cafeteria. So it's a constant reminder of these are our expectations. This is where we're reaching, and you can celebrate those. Read them out for students. Students might hear things, but they might not understand what they mean. And when you explain them to students, it allows them to have that ownership over that communication and the expectations. So another piece is part of that. I'd love to stay connected with you. As I said at the beginning, here are some of the resources. One of the things that we did, I just wanted to throw in here to stay connected as educators, we're doing this Walking Ed, and we're staying connected and learning each and every day by getting out, going for walks and sharing education. It's been a powerful learning experience for me. So I couldn't talk about communication without throwing a few of those things out there. So in summary, have expectations, make them consistent, and then communicate those throughout the year to ensure that what you're saying, students have that intrinsic motivation.
Thank you so much for that, Matt. Continuous, consistent expectations with students, making these a part of not just your classroom, but your school as a culture, helping to reinforce what you think student agency needs to look like or should look like, and having sort of clear benchmarks or perhaps even examples for students to follow, which we as teachers can also oftentimes model. So I think that's another way of creating expectations, is how you behave with your students is one of the ways in which you can expect them to behave with you as well as with others around them. From that, quick questions that have popped up while Matt, you were talking. One of these is to do with examples of realistic expectations for primary school students. Anything that, and I'm going to open this out to Kamna and to Tonya as well, in terms of what they think some realistic expectations when it comes to the little ones. How do we start setting these expectations out and helping them navigate expectations, really, because they don't always have a clear understanding of what expectations, how expectations need to be followed through. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it goes to knowing your audience. And if you're talking about primary, let's be real, they're not going to sit for more than 15 minutes. So if the expectation is to sit and do work for 30 minutes at a time, and then they can't reach it, that leads to some negative aspects of it. I know Kamna's going to talk a little about this, so I don't want to jump into her presentation too much, but I just focus it on the learning. We want to complete this learning activity in the next 30 minutes. If a kid needs to get up and walk around because they're 5, let them do that and make that the expectation, but make a secondary expectation that you can learn, but make sure that in your learning spaces, it's expected that you're not interrupting somebody else or whatever your expectation, so you can get up, walk around. Just make sure you're keeping within your own learning space and you complete the task at a time. And someone also talked about different teachers having different expectations. That's leadership. That goes to your building principles. And I'm talking to all of you out there, that if you set what's important to us, and if it's the learning aspect, then the classroom expectations will follow through from all of that as well. And I think no matter what the grade, from 3-year-old to 12 years old, if you create realistic expectations, then students will be able to reach them, from time on learning to, I mean, I hear, again, I don't know the language around in the world, but kids walk into an elementary cafeteria and teachers are screaming level 0, which means no talking. That's impossible. It's not going to be possible for 6-year-olds to not talk because you as the adult don't want them to talk. It goes to having expectations. Kids can talk at lunch. We talk at lunch. Imagine principal walking in the staff room is like, level 0, everybody. Teachers would file a grievance or they'd have a problem. So set the expectations no matter what the level is on what you expect for those kids, not for what you want.
Yeah, and I wanted to add I was just going to add a thought, like everything Matt just said was, yeah, I was just like nodding along, absolutely. And I think along with that, with those really young kids and really everyone, remembering the power of modeling and setting examples. So once we know our context, like Matt said, first of all, what's developmentally appropriate for these kids and their needs? And then within that, what does it look like to move around the classroom respectfully? What does it look like to work in my space and not disrespect others and those things that he mentioned? So a lot of times with young kids, again, especially at that start of the year when you're building this community, that day your mini lesson might be about like, what does it look like when we're all working hard as mathematicians or readers or scientists or whatever? And then actually showing them usually a non-example and an example and having kids be a part of this. So for the non-example, you can ask a child that you know will feel comfortable, like to model, like what would it look like if we're totally not being principled and we're being off, you know, and not being respectful to others, and they show what it wouldn't look like. So we really solidify that, and then have that same student then say like, and now what would it look like? What does it look like when we are, you know, being respectful and being principled and being caring to each other? And so they see it, and it's very clear, like this is how we're going to act together as a community because we care about each other. So that can be helpful too.
Absolutely. Kamna, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I was about to say, I agree with both of them. I think modeling is something that even works with teenagers when they see how the way the teachers communicate. I mean, and then your expectation has to be the same. Then you cannot speak one language while they are watching and expect them to be, you know, their tone to be something different. And the same goes for the younger ones. The more they see, they will fall into, I mean, and the expectations, as Matt said, have to be realistic. You cannot expect, I mean, in our times, used to have pin drop silence. There is no such thing as a pin drop silence. It doesn't exist. It's, I mean, why raise the bar so high and make it so difficult for them? And also not just for them, for us. So, yes. So the expectations have to be fairly realistic for everyone.
You're absolutely right, and I think that there's a fantastic book which I would recommend to everybody. I'll make sure that when the presentations are sent out, that all of the books that have been recommended today, there's been lots of them, that we're able to put all of these book recommendations together for all of you as well, and send them across. But there's this fantastic book by Nancy Sizer called "The Students Are Watching." You know, that we need to constantly demonstrate this belief in our students. And if we're not able to do that, we're perhaps not able to connect with them and make all of these different relationships that Tonya, Matt, and Kamna have been talking about, as well as all of these expectations. So along with setting expectations, it's equally important that we constantly, we're constantly mindful of what follows from those expectations. You know, are we also, I mean, we can't be excluding ourselves from these expectations as educators. We have to be equally a part of these expectations when they're set, and they have to apply to us as well. So some fantastic thoughts, all three of you. Now passing this on to Kamna to talk to us a little specifically about special ed and special needs students, and how we can go about doing everything that we're talking about with students with special needs. So over to you, Kamna.
Thank you, Pallavi, and thank you to the entire team of Highr for organizing such wonderful webinars. They've been quite a lifesaver in a time like this. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Just give me a second here. Sorry. Just give me a second. Yeah. So I'm going to focus on special needs and behavior management in the virtual classroom. Um, I'll start with a quote. Classroom management and is not about having the right rules, it's about having the right relationships. And I think the previous two panelists have made it very clear how important the relationships are. It's not about having the right rules, but managing those relationships. And we will be talking about uh, why are there challenges in our classroom. We all know there are challenges, be it a physical classroom or be it a virtual classroom. The nature, I think, of those challenges has changed slightly. Now, the driver's seat is also shared by the children, in the sense they have control over the video, the muting, chatting, a whole lot of things. So the challenges, the nature has changed a bit. And then the strategies which can be used. Before I go on to the challenges, just quickly telling you about the Shri Ram School and some of the systems and procedures which have really been beneficial. So the first is we are an inclusive school, which means that we have children with diverse needs, and all educators, special educators, the class teachers, subject teachers, activity teachers, all work in tandem for the holistic development of the child. The second, one of my favorites, a three-way partnership. When the child joins school in nursery, the parent says it is my child, the school says our child. And if you were to see the journey that the child has, he enters the school at 4 years and he exits when he's 18. So it's an enormous time that he spends. These are the crucial years. And I think the partnership is very strong for them, to shape the child into the future learners and thinkers. So this partnership is extremely strong, and I think this should be there in all schools. Then we have a special needs department. It comprises of the special educators and as well as the speech and OT therapist, and they together support the various needs that the children have. I would like to share that we have special educators attached with each grade. For example, in grade 1, we will have a special educator. There could be 2 as well, not just 1, who will cater to the diverse needs of the children and extend the support that the child needs. Now, why for the behavior challenges? I'll repeat what Matt said, that the expectations have to be very clear. And when we moved into the virtual zone, the expectations was spelled out very clearly by the heads of school, by the class teachers, by everyone. A mail sent to the parents, to the extent that when we opened recently after the summer break, there was a revisit of the same. So everyone is on the same page. Everyone knows what is there, that the cameras will be on, the chat, everyone needs to be on time, parents do not accompany. So all of this is constantly reinforced. But even though it is done, yet we still might face challenges. So some of the challenges that that might exist, and I've tried to categorize them into 3 categories, that is attention span, sensory needs, and cognitive. For attention span, the challenges that you face, for example, the child has switched off the camera, he's not responding, or he's interrupting, he's annotating. Just take one step back and think, why is he doing it? Obviously, he's not getting any joy out of being told stop doing it or whatever. So it could be that the 30-minute period would also be too much. He might be finding it difficult to sit for that duration. And the same can happen even in a physical classroom. So we tell the child to walk around during that time if he finds it difficult. The same can be done virtually. Leave your camera on and you are allowed, as long as the teacher can see you. Maybe he's finding the task assigned a little too difficult. Then again, he might resort to any of that. He's distracted, he's disengaged, and then he might just end up disrupting the class. School has moved to home. So parents might just say, okay, a tummy ache, a headache, you just go and attend your class. But the child is not really 100% there. So then again, he can be totally be disinterested and not paying attention, not cued into what you are expecting at that time. Sensory needs. The child could be overwhelmed by the multiple sounds. See, in a physical classroom, he knows where the source of sound is. Now, if there's too many tiles on your screen and everyone is talking at the same time, so the child can get foxed. And we started the academic year only in the virtual mode. So most of our children have not physically had a contact with each other. It's completely new classroom. So it can be a very overwhelming for a child with sensory needs. Then just the sheer number of tiles can be overwhelming for some children. Some might feel that he or she is the center of attraction, and they might act out. Cognitive. The child finds it difficult to cope with the task assigned for a subject. You've planned an activity like Kahoot, very exciting, the whole class is extremely excited. But this one child might have his reflexes could be slow, or his processing is slow, he's not able to. So he's not experiencing the success or the fun that the others are. So again, it can result in a behavior challenge in your class. Is unable to keep pace with the curriculum. You might have a child who finds it difficult to keep pace with the curriculum. And it's totally overwhelming. He's not understanding, he's not able to comprehend what is going on in the class. So again, it could result in a manifestation of a behavior, and then for you to manage. Sharing a few strategies. Please remember that these strategies can be used in not just with special needs, but with all schools and all learners. It's not that they are only meant for children with special needs. Most of them, you will see, do strike a note with what Tonya and Matthew had shared. The 3 C's very important to Sriram, which is connect, communicate, and circle time. Connect, which is like a check-in. So the educator, the class teacher, the subject teacher, anyway clocks in maybe a few minutes, 15, 20 minutes before the actual login of the class. So children know she's there, available. It could be for any reason. So that channel of communication is open, and not just at in the morning. Some of our educators even do a check-in right after the classroom or in the evening. Some of them have done a check-in every single day of the summer holidays. The aim is to connect, especially in these times when families and things are very unstable. Next comes your communicate. I think the more we invest in relationships, the better payoffs we will get. And that is something we need to pass it on to this generation who's spending so much time with us at school. And we communicate by our actions and words. So children have to be able to communicate with us, and it's not a one-way street. It has to be both ways. The teacher has to connect with the child, has to make that first effort, and the child will reciprocate. There is a reason why he's acting out in class. There is a reason why he's behaving the way it is. It is not just the behavior. Let's not all look at the behavior. Then comes circle time. This is a whole school policy. It starts from nursery to class 12. It is a part of our timetables. Be it a little child or be it a teenager, I think they feel less lonely when they are with their peers. So here, this is the time within the school timetable for them to connect as a group and to bond. It is a safe space, and they will also learn to connect, especially if they've not met each other. So all of this happens together. And then there is flexibility. Rigid teachers would probably create rigid students. So a certain amount of flexibility should be allowed to students. For example, like I said, if the child cannot sit on the desk for 30 minutes and do his task, then why not give him a little workout or mid-path, let him have that break. If he cannot copy the work that is set aside, so find a way where he writes the keywords. A little bit of flexibility should be allowed. And also when we are raising adults who are flexible in their approaches, who have a growth mindset and not a very rigid mindset. Motivate. In the current scenario, I'm sure most of the dinner time conversations are around your homework has come in. Have you seen your timetable? Have you finished your project? As a teacher, why not send a certificate or a sticky note or a sticker saying wonderful performance or you made an effort today? All these things will uplift not just the child, but also the family at large. Tomorrow, when you have a class, the same child will come in a happy mood. So, an unhappy child, obviously, if I'm calm and I'm happy, my absorption is far more. So, the aim has to be there. And another thing, that success cannot be synced or should not be linked with academics, because then we are somewhere narrowing the definition of success. Adaptations, in the next few slides, you will see what we mean by adaptations. If the child is finding the curriculum or a particular task difficult, then we do adapt it as per the level of the child. Parent-supported learning, this is relatively new in terms of the scenario that we are in. We have children who need an active teacher involvement, but in the virtual mode, it is very difficult for us to provide that active teacher, that one-on-one physical support. So we have trained parents, and the parents have taken over that role. So with some children, the parents do sit in the classes. For example, the child cannot lip read. So then the parent support is required, and the necessary IT training was already given to the parent by the teachers. So parent-supported learning, relatively new and works very well in the virtual classroom. Customized curriculum for children who are finding the whole curriculum of that particular grade very taxing or overwhelming, is not performing at that level. So we do customize it, and there are a number of websites which help in reinforcing the same. Parent support group for parents, which is, we have a group called the Caring for Carers. This group has seen a dramatic increase in the number of parents attending the sessions, which I think speaks for the social emotional condition that we are facing now. Here, all the parents connect. There are counselors and educators a part of this group. They went out, they share their feelings. They also gather support and strategies from each other. So I think the support group for parents should be there in all schools. It is really beneficial. And we had it even when under the normal circumstances, but now we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of parents attending our sessions. In addition to that, we have support groups for parents of special needs. We connect with the parents there, share strategies, empower the parents to support their children in the best possible way. I would like to share a small video which will cover all the strategies that we have spoken about, and they were used in the physical as well as in the virtual setting. Before that, there is this sample of worksheets. One is the original and the other is the adapted. This was done in the class, and the other one, as the child did not have the verbal bank, the vocabulary bank, so henceforth, and he's a visual learner, the same information was tweaked for him. This is of a slightly higher grade, and this is of a lower grade. So this is the expectation that was there from the class, and because the child is not performing at that level, so it was tweaked as per his level so that he doesn't miss out and is able to do the activity. And this is a sample of the customized curriculum. In this case, the child is using the digital notebook for all his work. If you can see closely, even the maths, the quizzes, the Hindi, everything is done here. And he finds the normal curriculum very overwhelming. So he gets a one-on-one for his classroom, because he finds it overwhelming to sit and perform even in a class of 30. So this is just a sample of the customized curriculum. And now is the video where you will see the strategies that were shared, and as I have mentioned before. So I'll just play the video.
Jack joined the Syrian school at 7 years. Jack was trying to understand the world around him. He found it difficult to express himself. The only way he could communicate was through hitting and shouting. It was difficult to make him sit in a class of 30 children. He loved it when he was using the computer, and he could type text fast and would enjoy looking at different types of videos. He did not talk to anyone around him. He was busy with the computer. His teachers decided to withdraw the screen from him. This resulted in Jack voicing his needs, and he started to ask for things that he wanted. He developed a keen interest in learning about numbers and calculating money. Suddenly, life came to a standstill. Everyone was in lockdown, and schools shifted to the virtual mode. Teachers were unsure of how Jack would adapt and whether it was a good idea to give him access to a computer. The teachers and parents worked together and introduced him to the digital notebook. He finds it overwhelming to work in a class of 30, and hence one-on-one sessions are held with his teacher. He can work independently on the notebook and looks forward to his classes.
And this is, I think, one picture that sort of sums up everything that we've discussed here. That kids are people too, and they have a lot of, we need to treat them with a lot of love, respect, keep in mind all the factors that are here, their emotional level, their confidence, their demands, and watch the way we speak and we conduct ourselves. Especially as educators, it is our duty to sort of develop their moral compass. And that can happen if only we are more careful in our actions and our body language.
So much for that fantastic insight, Kanna. I think we've all gone away thinking about how we might interact with kids with special needs when they're online so differently, because I think that a lot of the times what happens is that that we forget as educators, we tend to sort of earmark the kids who have special needs, and in that earmarking we tend to feel that a lot of the times the stuff that will work for our non-special needs kids might not work for the special needs kids. But at the end of the day, what does work is the love that we give as educators and the relationships that we build and the connections that we establish. And I think that that is something which is consistent across all the different kinds of kids in our classroom. So thank you so much for talking about how we can go about building those connections. And thank you for those supremely hands-on strategies as well. Couple of questions that have come in, and I'll just quickly take these questions, and I know we're a little bit over time. So just two questions very quickly. One of these was to do with, sorry, I had earmarked it. Yes, how do we help special needs children go through virtual transitions to new grades? That I thought was a particularly
virtual classroom too.
In new when kids are going into new grades,
yeah,
which a lot of kids have now, how do we help kids special needs kids do that virtually?
So it is again a time of bonding. Even we started our new session virtually. So there was a lot of time, like I said, the 3 C's, connect and communicate. The teacher and the student has to form a bond. You cannot mean just business and just work. It will not work. You have to first bond, know your child. The child has to bond with you. Like I said, we have educators connecting in the morning, even after sessions, and these are not purely academic sessions. We have sessions where the child just logs in, for he wants to speak to the educator. He wants somebody to connect with. Once that is done, then the rest of the things, the wheels are set into motion. Otherwise, it's very difficult if you just keep on making demands from the child.
Okay, super. This last question, I'm going to open to all 3 of you, get very quick bites from all 3 of you on this one. which is your own personal favorite strategies, or your sort of cards up your sleeve when it comes to building relationships online. If there was one takeaway that you could give everybody today about building better relationships online, what would it be? So we'll start with you, Matt.
So for me, I would say let people know who you are before you ask them who they are, so that they can connect with you. I try to be very transparent online, things that I'm passionate about, and I'm very consistent on the things that I feel I know and things that I need to learn and grow at. So if you're looking to build that relationship, start with you and share who you are, what you're passionate about, and how you can contribute to a relationship before you ask somebody else to contribute to yours.
So true. Thank you so much for that, Matt. Tanya.
Yeah, I would say in this online space to remember to make time for relationship building. So when we're physically in the classroom, a lot of our relationship building can happen incidentally. We're walking to the cafeteria, we're out on the playground with kids. If we're middle school or high school, there's a few minutes of transition time and we're at the doorway or kids are getting settled. And that's where we're talking about, like, oh, what'd you do over the weekend? Or how was your little sister's recital, or whatever, has been going on, or did you watch the game last night? But in this online space, we don't really have that time that we would have incidentally in person. So instead, often kids might be joining us online and we just immediately zoom in on, so get out your math journal or talk to me about what you've been reading, and we just go right to that. So instead, to open up a little space, even if it's just 2 minutes of talking with them, whether you're in a small group or one-on-one conference or something, and ask, how are you? What's going on? What have you been up to? And really the online space often opens up windows for us to even see more, because suddenly we're in their bedroom and we see like their stuffed animals, or we see the poster on their wall or whatever. And that can open up opportunities to make some connections, and they see that you see them as a person outside of just what we're doing right now in science or whatever.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Tanya. Making time for check-in, that's, I think, so crucial. Kamna.
See, in a physical classroom, I think children love food and break time is their favorite. So being from the junior school, just be there with when they're talking to their friends, get to know them better. They must get to know you better, see what's there, share, connect with them. That is the time, physical, like Tanya said, in school, and not during the class time as such. And in the virtual, it's, yes, the connect time need not be during the school time. It can be in the morning, it can be at the end, or whenever. That is the second part. And then in my sessions, what I do is I always ask them, what is it that you want of me? So it could be a tour around the house. It could be just read out a story. It could be just show me what you did, your drawing, when they asked, show me a picture. So that way. And for me, I ask them, knowing their strengths, I play on their strengths, that, sing a song or whatever. So it doesn't end on an academics. It's a more of a bond. So that way.
That's fantastic. So thank you to all three of you for these absolutely fabulous ideas, suggestions. And I know so many questions came in today, which we unfortunately weren't able to answer, but we hope we've tried to cover as many as we could. We will keep, if you'd like us to come back to your questions, if you can just put them up on the Facebook group wall, we'll try and see if we can answer some of them once the session is done and the recording is there as well. But thank you to all three panelists for such fantastic, powerful, needed ideas and great conversation. Thank you to all the wonderful participants who joined us in today, and for all the great comments and questions that kept pouring in, and for being so engaged and involved in the continuous applause that kept going along. So thank you for that. And teachers, keep the conversation going, keep your classrooms open, and keep your connections strong. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week. We'll catch you here on Monday for our next session. Thank you very much, panelists, and we look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.